Welcome, fellow wanderers of the night. If you think that the woods are a peaceful sanctuary, a place to escape the hustle of everyday life, think again. You've probably heard the whispers of the unknown, the stories people share around campfires, believing they're just tales to scare children. But tonight, you'll hear about what truly lurks among the trees. In the depths of the forest, where the shadows twist and the wind carries voices that aren't quite human, the line between the real and the unreal begins to blur. Remember, when you walk among the trees, you might just find more than what you were looking for. Some of these unfortunate souls didn't realize it, but they've just stepped into the realm of Mr. Scary Guy. Prepare yourself for a journey beyond the ordinary, into the shadows of your deepest fears. Welcome to the world of Mr. Scary Guy. I've always seen myself as a rational person. As a wildlife photographer, I'd spent countless hours deep in the wilderness, capturing the hidden beauty of nature. The solitude was my refuge, and the forest was a place where I could lose myself in the rhythm of the natural world. But my last trip into the Cascade Mountains changed everything I thought I knew. The assignment seemed routine. Spend a week in a remote part of the Cascade Range, documenting the flora and fauna for a nature magazine. It wasn't my first time in these woods. I knew their trails and secrets, or so I thought. But this time, I chose a spot deeper in than usual, lured by rumors of a hidden lake that few had ever photographed. My base camp was miles from the nearest town, tucked beneath towering pines that blocked out even the midday sun. The first few days were idyllic. I hiked through dense underbrush, capturing the morning mist rolling off moss-covered logs, the sunbeams cutting through the trees. At night, I'd sit by my campfire listening to the forest's nocturnal symphony, the hoots of owls, the rustling of unseen creatures. But on the third night, the forest grew unnaturally silent, as if holding its breath. I woke up just past midnight to a sound that was completely out of place. It was a low, guttural growl, vibrating through the ground beneath my tent. My first thought was a bear, but it didn't match the typical sounds I knew. I froze, clutching my flashlight, listening as the growling moved around my tent, circling slowly, as if it was studying me. My pulse quickened. I unzipped the tent just a crack and shone the flashlight outside, but all I saw were shadows shifting among the trees. The growling ceased abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence. I tried to rationalize it as a wild animal passing through, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been watched. The forest seemed different after that, less like a sanctuary and more like a predator's lair. The next morning, I found tracks in the dirt around my camp. They were unlike anything I had ever seen, deep, clawed impressions, as if something enormous had pressed into the earth. The stride was far too long for any bear or mountain lion. I snapped a few photos, telling myself it was just a strange coincidence, but I felt a knot of unease in my chest that wouldn't go away. Over the next 2 days, the sense of being followed grew stronger. I'd hear branches snapping behind me, leaves crunching underfoot when I wasn't moving. Once, while kneeling to photograph a rare orchid, I caught a glimpse of something through the lens, just a shadow slipping between the trees, too tall, too hunched. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there, just the quiet forest. On the 5th night, the growling returned, closer than before. It seemed to vibrate through the air, making my skin crawl. I grabbed my camera, trying to convince myself that I needed to document whatever this was. Maybe it was a new species, a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. But deep down, I knew it was something far more dangerous. I stepped outside, the cold biting through my thin jacket. My breath fogged in the air as I scanned the darkness with my flashlight. Then I saw it, just at the edge of the trees, beyond the reach of my light. A shadow, tall and hunched, with eyes that glowed a sickly yellow. They stared at me with an intelligence that no animal should possess. My legs locked in place, a primal fear freezing me to the spot. The figure didn't move, just watched me with those unblinking eyes. I felt like prey caught in a predator's gaze. My mouth went dry as I fumbled with my camera, snapping a blurry shot. The flash briefly lit up the clearing, and in that split second I saw it more clearly. A figure covered in matted fur, standing on two legs, its mouth twisted into a snarl. And then, as the light faded, it melted back into the shadows. I stumbled back into my tent, zipping it shut as if that thin layer of nylon could protect me. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my sleeping bag, gripping my camera like a talisman. Every sound made me flinch, convinced that the creature would tear through the fabric at any moment. At dawn, I packed up my camp with shaking hands. I decided to abandon my assignment. The forest no longer felt like a place of discovery. It felt like a trap. I took a different path out, hoping to put as much distance between myself and whatever that thing was. But the forest seemed to close in around me, the trees standing like silent sentinels, watching my every move. Even now, months later, I can't bring myself to look at the photos from that trip. They sit on a memory card at the back of my desk drawer, a reminder of the eyes I saw in the darkness. I know that no one would believe me if I showed them, but I also know that some things in the wild aren't meant to be seen. And sometimes, it's better to leave the shadows undisturbed. When I became a park ranger, I thought it would be a peaceful life, patrolling the trails, watching the seasons change, guiding the occasional lost hiker. I've always loved the quiet of the woods, the way the dense canopy filtered the sunlight, turning everything a soft green. But I've learned that the forest has a darker side, one that reveals itself when you stray too far from the beaten path. My last winter on the job taught me that lesson well. It was a brutal winter that year, with heavy snow and ice turning the trails treacherous. I was stationed in a remote outpost near an old, abandoned trail deep in the Appalachian Mountains. It was the kind of place where the air always felt colder than the rest of the forest, where no birds sang and the trees creaked in the wind. I often found myself patrolling alone, radioing back to base when I could catch a signal. One afternoon, a heavy fog rolled in, thick and white, reducing visibility to just a few feet. As I trudged through the snow, I heard a scream. A shrill, desperate cry that seemed to bounce between the trees. My breath caught, and I stopped, straining to listen. But the sound faded into the mist, swallowed by the silence. I radioed the station, but all I got was static. I debated going back, but my training kicked in. If someone was out there and needed help, I couldn't just leave them. I followed the direction where the sound had come from, winding deeper into the forest. After about a mile, I found a cabin, barely visible through the fog. It looked ancient, its wood rotting, half buried in snow. I had never seen it marked on any of our maps. The door was slightly ajar, swinging with a faint creak. I hesitated before stepping inside. The air was stale, filled with the scent of decay and something else, something metallic. The interior was filled with old, broken furniture and stacks of newspapers so yellowed they crumbled at a touch. On a small table, I found a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and stained. Inside were pages of frantic handwriting, describing voices that called from the woods, creatures that could mimic the cries of humans. A chill crawled up my spine as I read, the words seeming to blur in the dim light. The writer spoke of disappearing hikers, of the things that lured them deeper into the woods. I was about to close the book when I heard it again. A scream, this time just outside the cabin. It was closer now, clear and sharp, cutting through the fog like a knife. But as I listened, I realized there was something wrong with it. A hollow echo, like a sound being played on a loop. I rushed to the door, but all I saw was the dense fog, swirling around the trees. The scream came again, followed by another and another. blending into a chorus of voices. My skin prickled with fear as I remembered the journal's warning. Do not answer them. They are not what they seem. Panic gripped me, and I bolted back into the cabin, slamming the door shut. I pressed my back against it as if my weight could keep whatever was out there from coming in. The voices circled the cabin, whispering in a language I couldn't understand, their tones shifting from desperate pleas to mocking laughter. I covered my ears, but the sound seemed to seep through the wood, burrowing into my mind. Hours passed in that darkness, the voices never stopping. Finally, just before dawn, the whispers faded, replaced by the low moan of the wind. I stepped outside, exhausted, hoping to find some trace of what I had heard. But the fog had lifted, and the cabin looked different in the morning light. Older, more decayed. I tried to retrace my steps back to the trail, but no matter how far I walked, I never found it. It was as if the forest had swallowed the path whole. It took me another day to stumble back to the ranger station, cold and half mad with exhaustion. I tried to explain what had happened, but no one believed me. They chalked it up to the isolation, the winter cold playing tricks on my mind. I resigned from my post soon after, unable to bear the thought of returning to those woods. But the memory of those screams still lingers. Sometimes late at night, I think I hear them on the wind, distant but unmistakable. And every time I remember the journal's final warning, they are not what they seem. I had always dreamed of hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. The idea of walking from the sun-drenched deserts of California to the snow-capped peaks of Washington had a certain allure. It was supposed to be a journey of discovery, a chance to push myself beyond my limits. I planned the trip meticulously, but as I would soon learn, you can't plan for everything. By the time I reached the Sierra Nevada, I felt invincible. My legs were strong, my spirit high. I'd seen breathtaking views, slept under a sky so filled with stars that it seemed to stretch on forever. But somewhere near the midpoint of my trip, I made a decision that would haunt me. I spotted an old, unmarked logging road that seemed to cut through the mountains. It wasn't on my map, but I figured it might save me a day or two. So I took it. At first, the path seemed promising, wide and easy to follow. But after a few miles, it narrowed, overgrown with thick underbrush. The trees grew taller, blocking out the sun, and the air turned cold, damp with the scent of pine and wet earth. I should have turned back, but stubbornness kept me going. I told myself it would open up eventually, that I'd find my way back to the main trail. But the deeper I went, the stranger things became. I started seeing old, rusted equipment buried in the foliage, logging machines from decades ago, covered in moss. Once I stumbled across a tattered piece of clothing caught on a branch, faded and brittle with age. And then there were the carvings. Strange symbols etched into the bark of the trees, spirals and eyes that seemed to follow me. By the time the sun began to set, I realized I was hopelessly lost. The trail had disappeared, swallowed by the forest. I tried to retrace my steps, but every turn seemed to lead me deeper into the woods. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness, and soon the night closed in around me. That's when I heard it, a deep rhythmic humming, like a low chant carried on the wind. It seemed to come from everywhere, echoing between the trees. I thought I might be near a river, but the sound was too steady, too deliberate. I followed it, hoping it would lead me to some sign of civilization. I stumbled into a clearing that looked like it had been carved out of the forest with unnatural precision. The trees around the edges were twisted, their branches knotted together like skeletal fingers. In the center of the clearing stood a circle of stones, arranged in a way that seemed almost mathematical, too precise to be random. As I approached, the humming grew louder, vibrating through the ground beneath my feet. I felt an electric charge in the air, raising the hairs on my arms. It was then that I noticed the air had grown colder, and a mist was rising from the earth, swirling around the stones like a living thing. I reached out to touch one of the stones, and the humming stopped. For a moment, the silence was absolute, so profound that it felt like the world had paused. Then a shadow moved at the edge of the clearing. I turned, my flashlight beam catching a glimpse of a figure, tall and gaunt, its body blending into the darkness of the trees. I called out, hoping it was another lost hiker, but no voice came back, only the sound of the mist swirling faster, twisting into shapes that danced in the corners of my vision. The figure stepped forward, revealing a face that seemed to shift with the shadows. I stumbled back, tripping over a root, and as I hit the ground, my flashlight spun out of my hand, casting wild beams through the clearing. In those brief flashes, I saw more figures emerging from the darkness, their bodies fluid, like smoke given form. I scrambled to my feet, running blindly through the trees, the chanting resuming behind me, louder, more insistent. The air around me seemed to thicken, slowing my movements, dragging at my limbs. I could feel them closing in, their presence like a cold pressure at the back of my skull. I don't remember how I made it out of the woods. When I finally stumbled back onto the main trail, I was bruised, scratched, and half mad with terror. My compass spun wildly, useless, and my map seemed like a joke in the face of what I'd experienced. When I reached the nearest town, I tried to tell the locals about the clearing, the figures I'd seen, but they looked at me with pity.
"You shouldn't have taken that road,"
one old man said, shaking his head.
"That place doesn't like to be found."
I never completed my hike. I took the first bus back to civilization, leaving the trail and my dreams behind. But even now, I can't shake the memory of that night. Sometimes, in the quiet moments just before sleep, I hear that deep, rhythmic chant, like an echo of something ancient and terrible. And I know that somewhere in those woods, the shadows still dance. And so our journey through the dark woods comes to an end, for now. But as you try to sleep tonight, keep an ear out for any whispers on the wind or footsteps outside your window. After all, those who have seen the shadows of the forest say they never really leave you. The unknown, it seems, has a way of following you home. If you enjoyed these tales of terror, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories that will keep you awake, staring into the dark corners of your room. And remember, the next time you hear something rustling in the woods, it might not be your imagination. This is Mr. Scary Guy saying, good night and sleep tight, if you dare. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe by clicking the icon above. We've also got a playlist full of scary stories on your left side, and a suggested video you'll love on the right. Choose one and keep the scares going.